when I started training to improve my attention, I started to notice how much I really wasn't paying attention. Neurofeedback gave me awareness of what I was thinking. And I mean, that sounds sort of silly, right? We know what we're thinking, but do we? When we look at the science, what we find is I think this technology will change the world.
James Croall is a brain performance specialist. After 30 years in Silicon Valley, he didn't just want to work harder, he wanted to work smarter, think sharper, and unlock his brain's full capacity. Through cutting-edge brain optimization techniques, James cracked the code and found a way to break past his own limitations, not just for himself, but for the countless high performers he now helps do the same.
We're not limited by the brain we think we have. We can train it, rewrite trauma, undo conditioning that leads to things like ADHD or even narcolepsy.
It's almost like you're hacking into your brain.
It is. In fact, I think that's why I'm so drawn to it. We're trying to understand the language of the brain and then hack it.
Yeah.
Right, to perform better. Imagine how much of our life is dictated by how our brain works.
Yes.
And how we've been conditioned by the past, and this can help us break free.
Is that syndrome getting better now, or is gone?
It's a thing of the past. I mean, I would not identify as having attention deficit today or having a sleep disorder. In cases of this kind of depression, it has a really big impact. People often feel better within minutes.
Hi James, nice to see you again.
Hi Méline, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to San Francisco.
I would love to know what made you get into the neurotherapies, because I know you used to be a very successful hacker and a cybersecurity expert for 25 years.
Sure, yeah, I had a long career in cybersecurity, but I think my case was just another case of necessity being the mother of invention. In this case, I didn't invent something, but I discovered neurofeedback and neurotherapy. It was my own brain, right? I had more or less symptoms of narcolepsy. Just imagine being in Silicon Valley in an executive meeting and you just keep falling asleep. Right? It's not
What do you mean keep falling asleep?
I would easily just fall asleep.
Okay.
My attention was so poor. I succeeded based on really my creativity more than getting things done. I was always like racing to try to get things done.
Yeah.
And so my success was really out of this creativity. I had poor attention and I realized, I just wanted to feel better.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to progress in my career.
Yeah.
So I looked into neurofeedback, and then when I realized what this could do, I mean, I had no idea this existed.
Okay.
And when I realized we're not limited by the brain we think we have, but we can train it,
Yeah.
and that we can sort of rewrite trauma, we can undo conditioning that leads to things like ADHD or even narcolepsy, I was like, mind blown. I just had to get into it. I mean, to me, it's such an amazing field. When I realized what this could do, though, like I could literally change my thinking. I could literally like break free from these limitations. I realized looking at something really big. And so I didn't want to just help myself. I wanted to learn how I could help others with this technology.
And is that syndrome getting better now, or is gone?
It's a thing of the past. I mean, I would not identify as having attention deficit today or having a sleep disorder. So those things have really completely resolved for me.
So what is your first impression on your stimulation when you tried it for the very first time?
The first thing I noticed was neurofeedback gave me awareness of what I was thinking. And I mean, that sounds sort of silly, right? We know what we're thinking,
Yeah.
but do we? Right? And for example, when I started training to improve my attention, I started to notice how much I really wasn't paying attention.
Oh.
Right? I mean, sure, I was sitting here talking to somebody or watching a video, but I didn't realize how often my mind went to other places.
Yes.
And that was really cool. Like insight into your own mind is pretty amazing.
And then you quit your job to be a cybersecurity expert. And I know you now have your own firm to training people and help people to get to the peak performance and high focus state. Can you share with us like some of the stories of the people you are training?
Sure. So, well, first, just one detail. I wish I could say I discovered neurofeedback and then quit my job.
Yeah.
It actually took me about 7 years of study.
Okay.
Because I had a full-time job. I had to get different board certifications to really interpret the QEEG. So, a long journey.
Yeah.
And now, yes, this year I opened my own peak performance clinic. And I mostly work with people who are trying to perform better, right?
Okay.
I'm not a therapist, and so I'm not equipped to deal with complex PTSD or things like that. One really cool success story I had recently was a guy who came to me with a new son, really needs to show up and get things done.
Yeah.
And he started only getting about 20% of his to-do list done. And I could tell there was some pressure.
Yeah.
And we got a son, you need to show up.
Yeah.
And he met with me twice a day, 4 days a week for about 3 weeks. And by the end, he was getting 80% of his to-do list done. And he also told me about like some pretty significant changes at home. And to me, that's really fast. And he experienced almost like a linear progression. That's a great success case. Not every case is like that, but it's cases like those that I think are really, kind of for the showcase.
Personally, I have experienced neurostimulation for the whole week program, and I do find significant change in my life and in the way I'm thinking. The way I say it is almost like your brain's like a traffic or highway. If there have so many thoughts or a good idea, that's amazing. It's a sign of intelligence. However, if the car couldn't go through the highway, then you couldn't get anything done and you got overwhelmed. For those of us who never tried neurostimulation and neurofeedback, could you give us a simplified version of what is it and how does it work?
Sure. So I think we should separate. There's two different things. There's neurofeedback, which is EEG biofeedback, and then there's neurostimulation.
Yes.
And so neurofeedback goes back to, I think, the mid-60s when it was discovered. And this is more or less a process of measuring a physiological process, in this case, brain waves, reflecting that to the individual.
Yeah.
And it's really when the brain is able to see what it's doing reflected to it. The person, and well, not really the person, this is an unconscious process, can develop a better way to self-regulate. And so, for example, if we have trouble paying attention, which is what I struggled with, the neurofeedback would dim the screen or sort of change an animation on the screen when my attention lapses. And so, in fact, the game I was playing was a race car game. I'm not driving the car. It's driving on its own. But the speed changes based on my brain. And so when I get distracted, the car slows down and stops. And that's not very exciting. And so once I get back in the zone, the car continues.
Yeah.
And it does a couple things. So we would call this operant conditioning, where we're training a response, and behavioral conditioning. We're kind of reconditioning the brain to work in a more regulated way.
I have talked to one neurofeedback scientist. He told me, imagine if you want to practice smile, what you do. You need to look into the mirror, right, to see if you smile properly. And that's what he said is what neurofeedback doing. So you basically practicing how your brain functions. You can only practice it by seeing it as a mirror outside. Our brain producing different brain waves and different thoughts all the time. Unfortunately, we are not able to see it out. So my understanding is neurofeedback is basically tell you what's going on, and then you can do the intervention accordingly.
That actually leads us really nicely to neurostimulation.
Yes.
Because one of the challenges with some patients, some clients, is that with neurofeedback, they have to figure out how to get into the zone, right? And sometimes if somebody's really dysregulated, that's just really hard to get into the zone. It's a much more active process, and people have to somewhat engage with it. That's not entirely true. It actually also works on infants who they're not conscious enough to be engaging with it. But we can run into some challenges. Neurostimulation, rather than reflect your activity to you, it sort of walks you through the process.
Yes.
We're going to stimulate your brain with attention.
Yeah.
And then in doing that, the brain starts to learn how to do it on its own.
Yes.
And I like it because I find it to be much faster. And, most people, they don't want to learn all about neurofeedback and make it a lifestyle. They just want to get in and get it done.
Yes.
And so it's really beneficial in cases like that. And also there's lots of other brain health benefits to the different types of stimulation.
That's true. Actually, I think a lot of our audience might be first time to heard about this method as neurofeedback and neurostimulation. So during this episode, I actually would love to hear your feedback and your introduction on each different methodologies or different modalities the neurostimulation are using. Because to make it simplified, if neurofeedback is a mirror for practicing smile. I see neurostimulation almost like a clinical thing to give you light, to give you different treatment that you don't need to do anything personally, but it will work in a safely range because from my understanding, all the neurostimulation modalities now, they have actually very low voltage or power in a way. So they wouldn't be too significant that you burn your brain, let's say, if you want to say it in a more understandable languages. So let's get into neurostimulation 101. There has a lot of questions for you. Can you tell us from your practice in your clinic, what will be the step-by-step process if people want to getting more attention, want to get more focus or achieving peak performance? What does the protocol look like?
So the first step is we start with sort of an intake interview. Right? Just like when you meet with a therapist, they have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask a lot of the same questions, but I'm not really looking for things to talk about. I'm looking for things that are going to influence the brain.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty lengthy intake interview. And then we do a couple of different tests. The first one is actually before we get to the brain stuff, we're going to do a cognitive test. So it's about a 40-minute exam that looks at 8 different dimensions of cognitive performance. For example, working memory, geospatial reasoning.
What is geospatial?
So imagine how you navigate in space or how you imagine things moving around in space.
Yeah.
We look at response time, like how fast can you click a button. We look for digit span, how many digits can you remember and keep in memory, all these different things. And that's like an outside-in view. Yeah. And I can actually map all those tests to different parts of the brain.
Oh.
The next step, though, is we get to the EEG. And for the brain map, I actually do 2 different things. First is a quantitative EEG. And so it's a 10-minute eyes open recording and a 10-minute eyes closed recording.
Yeah.
And now this is your resting state baseline. It's like what Méline's doing, what her brain is doing when she's not doing anything.
Yeah.
That's important. But as I'm sure you are aware, life is not a resting state.
Yeah.
Right? So we also want to test your brain doing a task.
Yeah.
And so here we would choose between either an auditory or a visual pattern match, where what we're doing is we're testing information flow. So what happens when your brain detects that something's happened, orients to it, figures out pattern matches what's going on, and then decides what to do. Maybe you have to, in fact, inhibit a response, and then you observe what the outcome was. And so it's a complex process. Really, any of those steps can become dysregulated.
For those of us who don't know what EEG is, can you use a very simple language to explain to our audience what is EEG, why you need to wearing an EEG map when you do those tests?
Sure. Well, the EEG stands for electroencephalography, and we're literally measuring the electrical currents produced by the brain. And so they kind of filter up from the brain, all the different folds in the brain, they come from all directions, and we can read them from the scalp.
Ooh.
And that's what we use the electrode cap for. And I always tell people it's not comfortable, but it's not uncomfortable. It's kind of this, you've worn it.
Yes, right? It's not painful at all.
Not painful.
It's just a little bit glue, that's all. And then non-invasive.
Right. The important thing is the EEG is non-invasive. There's no energy that's going into your brain. We're just watching.
Yes.
And then we use that and we pump that through. There's a couple important steps. One part that I highly advocate for is a visual inspection of the squiggles. It's just like you see on a lie detector, you have the little squiggles coming out from the brain. In this case, the brain. It's really important that we look at that visually to understand the character of what's happening in your brain.
Yes.
And then we also pump it through lots of different computer-based analyses that teases out details you can't get from just visually looking at it. There's a lot of data we pull out.
So from my understanding, you basically first do a cognitive test to see how your brain function into spatial awareness, word finding, how fast you react to a task. And then you are wearing an EEG cap, which is basically like a measurement that you can tell how your brain functions during relaxed state and also performance state. And I recall during the time you monitor the heart as well. So you will see the relationship then with all this data being collected. as a practitioner, you are able to make an analytical thing about your patient's brain, and according to their need, you can basically modulate how do you treat it and to increase certain functionalities or connectivities to certain part of the brain. Is that correct?
That's right. We would look at the data. What's really important is that I correlate what's happening in the brain with your complaints and your symptoms. And then we work together to figure out, what are we going to train? How can we help you kind of reduce your symptoms and perform better?
One thing I recall is really funny. At the moment when I do my training with Dr. Nicholas, I was experiencing quite a lot of anxiety. And then after we see the map out of the brain, he basically subscribed me with different frequency treatment, light treatment, and also the oxygen chamber. I really feel I became more clear thinking, and it's almost feel like cheating because basically I just sitting there doing nothing and relaxed. And after a week, my brain got a total upgrade. It's almost like you're going to the gym for your brain, which I really, really enjoy it because it's effortless in a sense.
That's the nice thing about the stimulation, is it can be very effortless. But what I found is as the brain starts to change, we start to learn. You know, as our brain starts to work differently, we start to learn like how to function in that way. And it's kind of like, so in a very real way, we are learning to pay attention.
Yeah.
We're learning how to relax.
Yeah.
But the stimulation is really helping us along.
Yeah, I feel it's almost like a compounding effect. How I see everything you do for your body is like a snowballing, right? At the beginning, it's very small. I feel some people look so great. I can never be that great almost because they are so high function. I'm just lazy. And then when I start to reinvent and reprogram myself from different aspects, I realize the beginning is the hardest. And then it comes easier because everything's a compounding effect on the top of what you already done. So one thing I really love is if your heart or your body is a garden, are you watering the weed or you watering the flowers? Our channel believes everybody is a piece of humanware. So you have hardware, you have software, you have humanware. And let's go to the details of different type of treatment being used in neurostimulation. Can we start with the PEMFs? Like what was it, what it stands for, and how does it work?
Sure. PEMF is pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. And it's got a really long history. It goes back decades. And so PEMF, like in this arsenal of tools we have for the brain, it does a few things. And I'll keep this in simple terms. One thing it can do is it can actually entrain the brain.
Yeah.
So if your brain's not producing enough attention frequency, it can help train that. But it's also very effective at increasing blood flow.
Yeah.
And often in a brain that's not working well, will have reduced blood flow, like to the prefrontal cortex or even other regions. And so it's really good at those two things, like entrainment and increasing blood flow.
Last week, I happened to try one of the PEMF bag. And when you lay there, they will give you different PEMF power voltage. And then I realized some part of the body react more than the other. And how they explain it is this type of treatment will increase how your cells, it's almost like charging your cells and increase the blood flow. Is that the same thing for your whole body and for your brain? Or you would say the PEMF works differently?
I think I probably know which product you're talking about, but sometimes people talk about cellular activation.
Yeah.
And PEMF fundamentally can help increase blood flow, which is a good thing. But then depending on the frequencies we use, it can have other effects.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the handheld unit you have, that's really effective. There's a program on it for inflammation reduction.
Yeah.
And so it's like a specific combination of frequencies that are going to help fuel the inflammatory process so it completes quicker. PEMF in general has a positive effect. And then you go another level by modulating the frequency for all kinds of different effects. Like you can use frequencies that will specifically help bone healing, even kidney healing, for example. Very different body parts have different frequencies.
What about the noise treatment? We heard about those things about pink noise, brown noise, white noise. And also there have something called binaural beats. Like I practice a lot of sound bath. And when you have two different tuning fork into a very close range of the sound, your ear, just like our eyes, will making the blind spot. Your ear will have a blind spot. So that creates the binaural beats. So can you tell us what those noise do to our brain?
Noise has become a really important tool that we use when working with the brain. A healthy brain, in fact, every brain, sort of produces noise all on its own. It produces what we call pink noise. And this is a little bit different than the kind of snow you'd see on the TV. It's shaped in a specific way. And it's just natural. We see it all throughout nature. And so we know that the background rhythm of a brain is pink noise. And what can happen is when we have like a pathological thinking pattern or like an OCD, it's a deviation from that. There's a couple ideas with pink noise. One is that by giving the brain that natural hum, it can help restore the natural hum, right? Because it's getting what it's saying, oh, this is my natural hum. I can do more of this. Another theory is that by giving the brain noise, that's sort of random or pseudo-random, it sort of interrupts what the brain's doing. It's like, ooh, stop that OCD. And right, so there's a few theories, but it's become, I think since I started using noise, I think it's had a much stronger effect.
Our brain's so good at mirroring things. And whenever we hear a right noise that is imbalanced with our body, then your brain very likely to mimic it. However, if you just let it go, it will keep the interruption. And when you interrupt enough, according to the Hip's effect, you could go to the same neural pathways and it became a habit. Because I do experience some of my extremely high intelligent friends that happen to be very, very stressful as well. When they think, you almost smell bacon because they thinking so hard. You can sense their anxieties, but they do end up to getting the result. But then you are feeling like, it's almost feel like he's so intense in such a sense. So do you think those noise were helpful to calm it down?
Well, I think it could help. Like what I found is that the noise is a good adjunct to something else. So if somebody is getting really sort of agitated thinking or overthinking, there's probably something else going on. For example, they might have a lot of excess beta or high beta. And so for somebody like that, we'd give some noise to stabilize, give them that hum in the background. And just the noise alone will help, but we'd also want to give them some frequencies to bring down that anxiety-causing pattern. So it would be a combo. It would be a combination of things.
So the PEMF is a frequency. And this is a sound or noise. What is a binaural beats and how does it work?
Good question. So when most people think of binaural beats, they're thinking of, they put on their headphones and there's audio. It's got like one sound in one ear and one in another ear. And what happens is those sounds interfere with each other and create the beat that just resonates through the whole head. And so with neurostimulation, we can do something similar, but it's not actually using sound, right? We're not playing sound into the ears. We're using frequency. So we literally run frequencies maybe into your head on the sides and then on the front. And then they meet and interfere with each other right in the center. And then that frequency resonates through the whole brain. And so if we want to brighten up somebody's brain that maybe has some brain fog, we could do something like 140 hertz and 153 hertz. And then when it interferes, it produces 13 hertz, which is just a really good brightener. It kind of like just removes some of the fog.
So for the light treatment, we have the photobiomodulation? Yes. Could you tell us how does that work?
Photobiomodulation, it's exactly what you might think it is using light. And we typically use LEDs up against the scalp. And this, similar to PEMF, this has its own benefits. And so like PEMF, it can entrain. So if I give you 13 hertz right here, that's probably going to have a strong stimulating effect on your anterior cingulate. And if you're having trouble concentrating, that's going to probably feel pretty good. But the light also has different wavelengths of light have different effects. And the light in general seems to affect the mitochondria in the brain. And so this is really important because a lot of people who have dysregulation also have other things that are leading to like poor energy and unhealthy mitochondrial function. And so when we combine this with all this other stuff, we get a really good effect, like a compounding effect.
And can you tell us the different wavelengths of the lights?
Sure. So when we do photobiomodulation, different wavelengths of light have different properties and different effects on the brain. For example, I think it's 1070 is infrared range. You can't see it with your eyes, but it has the ability to reach really deep into the brain. Something like an 810 is really good at reducing inflammation, but has a lower reach. And then if we use something like ultraviolet on the body, that has the ability to kill bacteria and things like that. Depending on the situation, we can use different wavelengths for different applications.
Okay, next, TDCS and TACS.
TDCS is transcranial direct current stimulation.
Yes.
And TACS is alternating current, so transcranial alternating current. TDCS is useful when we need to have an immediate effect. Yeah. And that's where TDCS really shines. Because like, for example, with migraines, with depression, like it can have an effect just like that. If I could snap my fingers, I would snap them, but really fast. Yeah. TACS is better for like a long-term effect. So TDCS has an immediate effect, but then it wears off. And then that's where TACS comes in. So TACS is actually training the brain over time. So over time, it's going to learn how to do that. And so often what we might do is use TDCS to help somebody right now to like get them calm. And then the TACS has the longer.
Why TDCS is right now? It's just the same?
Right, it's not alternating. The power goes up and it stays up. It's just
So if you see the shape, it'll be like this?
Yes.
Oh, so TDCS is almost seems like they just give you one-time treatment to make it stop or make it feel better. But TACS is actually make your brain to learn rather than just give it one dose.
Yeah, more or less. Usually with TDCS, we would incorporate it into the program. So we're doing it every time. But after a while, it's really the TACS that produces the longer lasting effect. And they're both electric. So we're literally sending electricity through your brain.
Okay.
But this is a very low level, very safe. In fact, the equipment I use, there hasn't been any history of any injuries from this technology. And so what this is very effective at training the brain. Yeah. So if we want that prefrontal cortex to go faster to help some ADHD, this is really the money shot. This is one of the strongest tools we have for training the brain to go faster.
So you want to make your frontal lobe to go faster?
Well, if you have ADHD and you have too much slow wave activity, yes, you do.
Actually, I recently come across two devices, both introduced by two scientists, that one using TDCS, one using TACS. So the TDCS machine is called NATO from Sunfire. They are making a hairband that you can wear. And what they do is actually they can prevent the menstrual pain.
I've heard about this.
We interviewed the founder as well of this company, and I feel it's a very interesting approach to wearing a headband rather than keep carrying around the painkillers. And then there has another company called Somne, created by Dr. Matthew Walker, and they are using TACS on the same place, like frontal lobe, and then to basically help you to fall asleep better or improve your sleeping. Could you explain how does that work? Will it work? And why it work if they work?
So with TDCS, fundamentally how it works is it creates a circuit, and one end of the circuit becomes it excites the brain.
Yeah.
And the other end, it soothes the brain. There's a release of GABA. So think of it like on one end of the circuit, there's a release of GABA. And on the other end, there's an excitatory release of things like glutamate to excite.
So they excite and calm the brain at the same time.
Yes. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In a case of depression, like one of the historical profiles of depression, and in fact, I think this is some of the science that the headband is based on. What we see is the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is overactive and the left is underactive. And so with TDCS, we put the circuit here and here, and it starts to shift the balance. Like one the left gets excited, the right one gets calmed, and so this sort of changes the balance. And in cases of this kind of depression, it has a really big impact. In fact, people often feel better within minutes of running this. And now I'm not familiar with the science of the menstrual cycle and so on, but I think that it's also affecting pain and some other things. But I think that's the core principle is it's shifting the balance of energy to create a better regulated brain.
Yeah. What about using TDCS or TACS to improve sleeping quality? Is there any science behind it, or would that be possible?
There is. In my experience, It depends on what the person's brain looks like. For example, I have a client right now who has a lot of really fast activity in the back of his brain. And so what I could do is use TDCS to soothe that. It really depends. Sometimes it really depends on the person. It is amazing, though, when we have a one-size-fits-all product.
Yeah.
Like the Somni, I'm not sure how it works. My guess is that if it's stimulating the frontal pole here, the prefrontal cortex, that it's stimulating it with something gently soothing, like maybe a TACS, like a theta or something like that.
I recall during the bootcamp study, there has a little chart of different shape of the frequency. What was those like? Is that for TDCS and TACS?
So I think you're referring to the waveform shape.
Yeah.
And so typically when we're doing this, we're using a sinusoidal wave. And that's when we normally think of alternating current, that's what we think of, a sine wave.
So alternative means that you preset a type of current. It could be this shape, spikes. It could be this shape, more waved. Why?
To be honest, it's not a feature we use very often.
Okay.
The sine wave is what the brain produces. So if we put a sine wave into your brain, it recognizes it.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like brain activity. The reason we might use something else is imagine somebody's just not responding. Like giving them some beta to help with their ADHD, but it's not enough. If we changed it to a triangle or a square wave, it's stronger. It's like a stronger dose.
So that your brain says, oh, there's something new. Let me...
Pretty much, yeah. And so that I typically reserve for special cases where it's warranted because, frankly, it's uncomfortable. But sometimes I use it if I just really want a good hit of energy.
It's almost like you're hacking into your brain. It's your old profession, basically. Hacking into your brain rather than computer.
It is. In fact, I think that's why I'm so drawn to it because...
Yeah.
To understand, like, I was really good with computer programming languages, picking them up very easy. And what we're doing here is we're trying to understand the language of the brain and then hack it to perform better.
I think maybe that's why you learned this so fast, because I heard from, you have clearly studied this and doing this for a long time, but I heard even from the beginning from our circles, they said you are so good at it, you implement it really well. I imagine those abilities transferred into this neurohacking, I would say.
I imagine so. I'm just a neurohacker.
But do you need to keep doing it with the TACS, or after a period of time, this patient may not need it anymore?
So this is a really good question because anybody can go online and buy a TACS device. You can get one for like $100 or less.
Yeah.
Some people even make one with a 9-volt battery. And that will run current through your brain, but it tends not to stick. What we found with the modality that I'm using is that by combining all these different techniques, the noise, the TACS, the PEMF, the photobiomodulation, it has a stronger and lasting effect. Now, you still have to take care of your brain. Like I tell people, like if you come to me and work with me and then you go off for 2 weeks on vacation and you drink every day and just don't take care of yourself, that's not going to be good for your brain. And so it might hurt. But as long as you take care of yourself, this changes your baseline.
What about vagus nerve stimulation? I think that is such a hype recently.
Good one. Yes. In fact, that's something I use with maybe about 25% of clients because, face it, like a lot of people come in and they're stressed.
Yes.
And vagus nerve stimulation, there's lots of different ways to do it.
Yeah.
What I do in the office goes on the left tragus, more or less hot wired to the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. And when we stimulate it, it helps the autonomic nervous system to better balance.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to do it. In fact, a skilled practitioner can actually do acupressure on that point and create some benefit. There's also a lot of consumer products now. I think the market is swamped, well not swamped, but has a lot of options today.
But for the vagus nerve stimulation, they gave also electro?
Sure. Well, there's lots of ways. We can hook on to the little tragus here. We can reach it through the neck, and there's some products that do that. There's the Apollo wristband, which goes on the wrist, has a soothing effect to the vagus nerve through, I think, the PC6 acupressure point. Different products do different things. Like some use a frequency, some use different types of waveforms.
So basically, they just want to activate this vagus nerve with different type of modalities.
Yes, and there's different techniques. There are a few different types that we know There's evidence that they work, and so people tend to use those, but there's probably a lot of ways to do it.
But what does vagus nerve do in our system?
So the vagus nerve is connected to our autonomic nervous system. We want to be in a zone where we're sort of balanced between parasympathetic rest and digest and sympathetic fight or flight.
Yeah.
And, the fact is you want both. In order to pay attention, you need some sympathetic arousal. But you don't want these either to get too out of control.
Okay.
And the vagus nerve is essentially our pathway to modulate that.
And what about the hyperbolic oxygen? I know it's not go directly to your brain, but you basically have a high dose of purified oxygen. What that's going to do for your brain?
So that's going to have a strong effect on detoxification, reducing inflammation. Mm-hmm. Not really my strong area.
Yeah. So let's make a sum up of all the things we've been talking about. I know there's more in neurostimulation. So first you got the light, which is photobiomodulation, that you use the light to make your brain go calm and reduce the inflammation. Mm-hmm. And then you have the noise, so you can give it pink noise, brown noise, or white noise, or binary beats. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you got is vagus nerve stimulation, which you can stimulate your vagus nerve in different ways to balance your parasympathetic system and sympathetic system to put yourself in a more calming state. And you can have more oxygen dose to put your brain into a more holistic and healthy state. And think about it. Even just imagine what you do those to your brain, it could put your brain into a different state. I really love the quotes of you can't solve the problem from the brain that's creating it. I believe people need to be the CEO for their own health, do some research, but we would love that our audience to see there has a different approach to their health rather than just keep taking medicine. Next thing I would really love to talk about is actually the neurodevelopment conditions. Right now, autism, high functional ADHD is such a huge thing. Many people got those syndrome. Could we start from ADHD?
ADHD is an interesting one. Nearly everybody these days suffers from poor attention, whether it's genetic, in which case we might call it an ADHD, or whether it's just the environment. Right, our tech devices, our social media. In attention deficits, I see two different patterns. One is when there's a genetic component. And often, people think, oh, well, it's my genes, it's just who I am. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the science, what we find is those genes are causing perhaps our production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine to be reduced. And right, if you don't have enough dopamine or norepinephrine, it's hard to pay attention, it's hard to be alert. But why is that? Is that just who you are? Well, I think from the work of William Walsh and Amy Asko and others, looking at our genetics, we find that there's metabolic processes that can be worked around.
Yes.
Right? If we take the right supplements, the right vitamins, we can actually correct some forms of attention deficit that way. And that's great. That's one camp. And then another is those of us who, just because of our lifestyle, right? I won't bring out my phone, but our phones, the scrolling, the social media, multitasking, that's sort of driven our brain to have poor dopamine and reward circuitry. In fact, we can even talk about reward deficiency syndrome, which is basically we've exhausted all of that. And so we're not getting enough dopamine, enough joy. And when we don't, then it just makes it hard to pay attention and we seek the hit from other places. That's my understanding.
And when you see the brain scan for the people who have ADHD compared with the people who don't, what do you see the difference?
Great question. A brain with an attention deficit, let's say, because there's different kinds. We could see one of a number of patterns. One of the most common is reduced blood flow, which manifests as lots of theta brainwaves in the front of the brain.
Yeah.
In the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate. This is one of the most common that I see, and also one of the easiest to train, right? And we can help the brain correct that imbalance pretty easily.
I read a research to said people who have ADHD or attention deficits, they have 300% chance to creating their own company of that.
I struggled with poor attention for a long time. One of the things people with ADHD often talk about is hyperfocus or getting really passionate about something. In fact, that's what I did with neurotherapy, right? Yeah. I discovered this and then I went deep and then ended up starting my own business. Just going deep, really wanting to understand all the little details that leads people to these types
Yes,
of things.
I believe that's also a superpower. So when you do your brain training, how do you make sure that people still function really well?
So I think this is super important because I've actually had potential clients tell me, I'm afraid you'll take away my superpower.
Yeah.
And I've never seen it. I've never seen anybody lose their creativity, their focus, and neither have any of my mentors. What we're doing with neurofeedback and neurostimulation is we're not training you to just be one way. We're training you to have better flexibility. So for example, imagine an ADHD brain is just kind of stuck in a daydreaming mode that prevents them from getting things done. When we take that away, what it means is your baseline, you can focus when you want to, you can daydream when you want to. It's restoring flexibility.
So it's improving the cognitive flexibilities
Yes.
rather than... I feel the best part of what people could do is you can be focused, you can be in the flow when you want to, but you can also be relaxed and don't think about your work, to just have some free time when you want to. But if you can only do one over another, I think that's a inconvenience.
It is. And an example for me is I thought I was creative before and I didn't want, in fact, I was one of these people, I didn't want to lose my creativity. What I found is my creativity is far, far deeper now because I have this flexibility, I can actually go deeper into these like liminal unconscious states. And the best thing is I can focus to actually follow through on all my creative ideas.
Yes, I actually followed that. I feel the fun part of our feelings, our brain is before you get to a next level, you don't think the old level is not comfortable. But until you got to a much more clarity in your life, you realize, wow, how can I stay that way, right? One big difference I experienced in this year is I used to have a lot of thoughts in my mind. And it almost feel like my thoughts was planned many steps ahead of the time. And before I thought that was a sign of wisdom. I thought, oh my God, I'm so smart. I'm able to, think really quick, react really quick. And I enjoyed it before. Now I have changed quite a lot. It's almost like I have no thoughts in my mind. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I feel much better. And when I do things, I'm here right now. I'm not in the next moment to wherever I'm supposed to go later. And that gives you expansion of time and space that you realize that there's nothing better than right now in this studio we're talking, and I don't worry about things happen after. So I believe that's actually a sign of new type of wisdom. You can plan for your future when you do that. So when you do the future plan, you do that. But when you talk with your friend washing laundries, you can still find the joy out of it. And I think it's a combination of many different experiments, but I highly recommend our audience to go try different method, either it's traditional method or if it's advanced method, to be in control, be the CEO, to take care of your health and your brain. Anyway, that's a big comment on that thing because I do feel difference. What about Alzheimer's and also all those very serious diseases in later stage?
When I think of Alzheimer's, I also think of sort of a more natural or less severe cognitive decline. As we get past 50, our brain starts to slow down. Like the frequency it's producing starts to slow down a bit more, unless we keep it active, right? Obviously, we all know people who are 80 and gosh, it's like they're 30 right now. But what can happen is as the brain starts to slow down, we start to just lose some of our functionality. In fact, there's a marker. When I look at the brain of maybe a 70-year-old, what we can do is we can kind of estimate, are they going to need care soon? Right? But the good news is we can mitigate that. And so even just neurofeedback and neurostimulation both can help speed the brain back up to a point where the person is still much more functional and capable day to day on their own. Now with Alzheimer's, it's a little more severe, and when you start to really see deterioration of the prefrontal cortex. But that's still something we can mitigate. And so photobiomodulation has shown a lot of promise in mitigating that, or kind of holding off the progression. It's not a fix, but it has been found to be very promising in kind of slowing the progression and giving folks a lot more good years.
I believe our body is really good at hiding sickness until it became too severe or too serious to be treated. And I'm thinking either you do the method of learning something new, getting neuroplasticity, or doing some different brain training. I think it's a good way to look into it. Next thing, I think it will be a fun part. Let's try some of those devices, because I have come to your practice before in SF. I realized you have basically all the devices I can find in the market. It's almost like working in the candy store when I go to your practice. Could you show us some of it?
I've got a couple. And so we'll take a look at the vagus nerve stimulation first. And so this is my favorite right now.
Yeah.
Of the vagus stimulators, the pulsetto.
Okay.
And so it's like a little collar. And the way we do it is, this is brand new. I'm not going to actually do this live, but I'll explain. So this is a conductive gel. This device, it's a collar. And see, it has these little metal electrodes. These are electrodes. It's going to zap just a little bit. And so this goes around the neck, and the vagus nerve runs sort of down the left side of the face, down the neck, and down into the
But wouldn't that interfere with your heart when you go to that side of your heart? Or is
it interferes in a positive way.
Okay.
Right? This is a healthy way. So what we do is we put a little of this gel on these to make it more comfortable. We do a session of about 10 or 15 minutes of stimulation. And there's different protocols.
Yes.
What I like to do with this is just sort of meditate. And so it helps put me into a relaxed parasympathetic state, ready for sleep. And because I think a lot of people, like, poor sleep is a epidemic, pandemic. It's a problem around the world today. And so this products like this can help with that.
Yeah.
It's relatively affordable. That's one of the other things I like about this product. It's something that, a lot of people can afford to have at home and use on their own. Another piece of tech that I brought is actually for neurofeedback. And so this is the BrainBit Flex. And this is, it's really cute. So this is an EEG cap, but it's something that a consumer can have at home. So it comes in different sizes. And so it uses these little electrodes. They got little springs on them. See, this one would be good for your hair. Your hair is longer than mine, obviously. For my hair, we want the short ones. The way this works is, imagine somebody comes into my office to get a brain map. Right? We do the whole assessment and we figure out, there's that attention deficit. It's right here at the anterior cingulate. So I can send them home with one of these. And what they do is, this is the EEG amplifier. Just imagine those big ones you've seen. For simple training at home, this is great. And so what I do, it's a really good look, I promise.
Yeah.
So there's the electrode. At home, I would just...
it's relatively easy to put on.
Yeah, it's very easy. Because the cap is marked, people can easily find the locations.
Is that same protocol you use, or they have different protocol?
It's different. Remember, this is very personalized.
Yeah.
I tend to not use any standard protocols because every brain is different. And so I would send the protocol to a platform that then runs on their phone, a little program. And so they can sit at home for maybe 30 minutes a day or a few times a week and train the brain on their own.
Oh.
For me, this really, I think, lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of people.
The people using this need to have a subscription, or they can just use it if they don't know someone like yourself? Can they just use it at home?
I would advise, if you're going to train your brain, to work with somebody who's going to measure it and sort of guide you through the process.
That's
but you can, there is software. So like, I think an enterprising individual or hacker who wants to learn all about neurofeedback can purchase software and do this on their own. Personally, I think it's tech like this that's going to make it more accessible, that will help this industry really take off, like getting it in more people's hands. One of the things I would like to mention is that pretty much everybody I do a brain map on, I look at their brain and sometimes they fall asleep when we're doing the brain map. It's really common. I've even seen people go into REM sleep. Something that I often recommend to people is they start tracking their sleep. So one of the other devices I have with me is the Oura Ring. Yeah. And I see you've got one too.
Yes.
Nice color choice. I actually keep one of these in my office. And if somebody comes in and it's just bad, like imagine they're falling asleep within a minute, they really need to do something, I can loan them the Oura Ring to help them track their sleep.
Yeah.
But if somebody has inattention, the first thing to look at is sleep. Because if you're really sleep deprived, it's going to make it hard to pay attention.
Yeah.
And so it's important to try to get that cracked before doing the other stuff.
So if a person who wants to start to look into the product, what will be the good way for them to choose those products, what will working for them?
Rule of thumb is that if somebody is interested in training their brain, to find a local practitioner who can work with them on the process and help them really do the right thing for them. If somebody wants to do something on their own and kind of test the waters, there are products like the Mindy headset, which I should have brought with me. The Mindy headset, which can train the prefrontal cortex. And if that's your problem, it can be very helpful. But the Sensei headset is sort of this big set of headphones and EEG sensors. And it does a really nice job of just overall peak performance. How do we train your brain to pay attention better, to get into a relaxed state, to meditate? Some products like that you can do without like a practitioner. And I admit I'm biased, but I do think, if you really want to do this right, I suggest finding somebody that you trust and have a good vibe with to work with.
One of the last part we're going to cover is about the ethics. Is this world really well regulated? And is there some safety concerns in using those devices?
There are various organizations that credential in this field. So I have quantitative EEG technologist certification, so that really qualifies me to interpret and read the EEGs. There's also the biofeedback certification board, which looks at neurofeedback and biofeedback. But this is really looking at the practitioners. Like, is your practitioner kind of qualified to deal with this? Then there's also the FDA. And so most of this tech is considered for general wellness and relaxation, which is how we're using it. I don't treat ADHD. I don't treat any specific medical conditions. What we do is look for ways that the nervous system is dysregulated. We help that along, and the person feels better and the symptoms become managed. But I think you're asking about like safety. And so one of the things to consider is that there's no history of injury from this. But if you consider, we can help somebody reduce their anxiety. That means is it's also possible to increase somebody's anxiety if you do it wrong. And that's why I think it's really important to find a practitioner that you trust, that you have a good connection with. Like, I'm a big advocate of quantitative EEG and really looking at what we're measuring before we're trying to train it.
Yes.
It's not everybody uses that, but I'm a big advocate of that.
I think for any new method or any method you want to try on your body to make it healthier, better, you really need to find the good people. And how do you find it? Do your research. Like, I think everybody is in response to their own health. You shouldn't just say, okay, this seems like a good idea, let me try, do research. I think that is one of the most important things I would love the people who's watching to be aware of. Okay, obviously you are treating a lot of patients. I'm wondering, for the neurostimulation treatment, what is the success rate? How many people's neural function getting changed after the treatment?
When I define success, I mean somebody's symptoms are significantly reduced, right? I'm not treating anything, I'm not curing anything, but what I'm seeing is people greatly reduce their symptoms. I can tell you two really quick examples. One was a case where just really struggling with stress and get up and go. In fact, she may have identified as being like a PTSD case. Just with some simple, basically relaxation training, she's now able to launch her new coaching business. And right, so this was a really big deal for her. Another case is ADHD, which I've seen a number of times. But imagine somebody going from only getting 20% of their important like honey-do list, right, their home to-do list and their work stuff done, to getting 80% of it done and having a different relationship with even their wife because of that. Like, that's transformative, and I think that's really cool. We're not making his ADHD go away. In fact, in that case, I think he's still taking some medications, but that's a huge improvement in symptoms.
When we speak about the PTSD, I recently come across an individual, he got a heart opening surgery, and during that heart opening surgery, obviously he's completely being numb-shocked, so he wouldn't remember a thing. But during that surgery, he got 3 strokes in his brain, And then after that, he said he probably got the PTSD and he wouldn't be able to function as well as he used to. Do you think something like neurostimulation could help with emotional trauma?
I think it could. We'd have to look. You can't manage what you don't measure. But even for things like traumatic life events, it's not like I was in an accident or something, but like a traumatic event. Yes, there's often ways we can help the nervous system become better regulated. I think you were also curious about failures, like when does this not work? And I have had a couple of those. But what I typically find is when somebody doesn't respond or it doesn't stick and last, it's because there's something else going on. For example, like a mold toxicity. For example, I have one case where it seems like they actually have some toxic exposure.
Okay.
And so the brain's kind of in crisis mode.
Oh, it's almost like a brain like, nothing come in.
Right.
So no matter what you do, they will be like, I'm guarded because I need to survive.
Right. Another case is metabolic. And these days people talk a lot about like the methylation cycle and getting the right nutrients and minerals. Now, in most cases, even if somebody has some of that, we can get decent results, but sometimes we need to address that first. And so in my work, I try to look for red flags because I don't want somebody to spend their money and not get anywhere, right? So I try to look for red flags and then support that first before doing the brain training, if necessary.
Where do you see the neurofeedback and neurostimulation and in general our brain health going to go in the future 10 to 20 years?
Boy, 10 to 20 years, that's big. So honestly, this might sound corny, but I think this technology will change the world. Imagine how much of our life is dictated by how our brain works.
Yes.
And how we've been conditioned by the past. And this can help us break free from that past and really be present and live. This has the potential, if we can reach scale, to really change the world. I mean, that's what I'm in this for.
I really love our topic today because I think many times when we see the sickness or disease, we see the place where have the issue. But my fundamental belief is brain is the central CPU of every signal being sent from there. So I think that's a really new and fun approach to start with your brain. I can feel your passion every time you talk about what you're doing, you spark. It's really lovely talking to you and reconnect to you again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Humanware Project. To help us to getting more amazing content out there, please subscribe. It means a lot and it will help us to grow. And let's go on this journey together.